thank you all for coming. Hopefully we'll see you again for the symposium on the 23rd, 24th. It is a fantastic symposium. The group of speakers is really top-notch. We have our whole list of speakers. Most of them were our keynote speakers at other symposiums, other places, and we have them all for you. So do hope you all come to that. Look into that. It's on the website. It's a great program. I'm going to talk about grasses today. I wasn't sure, you never know whether people get excited about grasses or not, but apparently
they did.
People have gotten excited about grasses, so everybody's out here. And that's good. Grasses are extremely important plants. It's a widespread group. Grasses account for about 20% of the Earth's vegetation cover, believe it or not. They're the fourth largest family. I know orchids. I think orchids, asters maybe, and beans are the other three families that eat them out. There's about 600 genera of grasses, 9,000 to 10,000 species, depending on your taxonomist. So really a very, very widespread group. Fairly old group. They developed an evolutionary strategy, most of them early on, to not have a central trunk, to branch low to the ground. That's to kind of co-evolve with animals that forage, things like that, because you can be eaten down to the ground, and if you branch low, you can re-sprout. Not like a tree that if it's eaten down, can't necessarily re-sprout. Also evolved with fire ecologies, because again, that crown is down low. They can be burned, come back up, and work well. Which makes them tough landscape plants. You can do a lot of abuse and they'll keep coming back. As you probably have all experienced with some of the Bermuda grass getting into your beds and things like that. They can be pretty tenuous, tough plants. Not tenuous. Be pretty tough plants. Let's see. Grasses are, for humans, probably the most important group of plants around. And we are talking about true grasses, the Poaceae. When I'm talking about grasses, not grass-like plants, not related plants, but plants in the family Poaceae, true grasses. They are by far and away the most important group of plants to humans. Something like 70% of the world's food source are plants in the Poaceae family. That's corn, wheat, rice, barley, sugarcane. Also, in some areas, bamboo is an important crop for construction purposes. That structures built out of bamboo, like say scaffolding, which is used in a lot of more tropical countries and some Asian countries. In typhoons, things like that, steel will snap, whereas bamboo will stay structurally sound even under extremely high winds. So important crop, and becoming even more important with biofuels. Grasses have been used in biofuels for a long time. Ethanol is a biofuel made from corn. But other biofuels, we have researchers at NC State who are working very hard on developing grasses as biofuels, because they'll grow in very tough environments. They don't need prime cropland where we need to grow food, because we've got to feed the world. But they'll grow in these tough environments and can put on a tremendous amount of biomass in very tough conditions. Any questions about grasses in general before we get started? And we're going to, of course, talk about the ornamental grasses, not some of these food crops. But it is good to put it in perspective. Sometimes ornamental folks like me think of plants kind of just about as ornamental, but they are important for a lot of other reasons. As always with these tours, I really appreciate feedback from other people. So from all of y'all. So if there are plants you've grown or have comments about, please share that with everybody. Different people have different experiences and different gardens, and so we always like to hear that. What I say is not the end all and be all about this. There's a lot of great experience in this crowd, I'm sure. So I'd love to hear from you. Got a long list, so we're going to move fairly quickly. So I'll give everybody enough time to catch up if you're keeping up with the crowd. If you're straggling, I'm not waiting on you. But this is a big group today, so there may be some spots. I thought we were going to have plenty of room for all the spots. Some of the spots we may have to kind of crowd around. Please be cognizant of the plants around you and the soil. If you get into beds, there are little plants under there that are dormant now. We have winter plants that come up and are dormant during the summer. So please try to stay out of beds as best you can. I will be getting in the beds to stand close to the plants, give more room for y'all. I know where the little things are, or if I step on them, then I can be mad at myself. I don't want to be mad at y'all. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started then. First plant on the list is a group of real popular ornamental grasses, Miscanthus. This is Miscanthus sinensis morning light. The Miscanthus have been used for quite a while as ornamental grasses because they've got this really nice arching kind of fountain structure, really fine texture, really beautiful in the garden. Morning light is one that's a little bit smaller than the species. It usually grows 3 to 4 feet tall. You put it in a nice rich garden soil, give it a little bit of water, it'll get bigger than it is here. It's pretty well stressed here. But it's also selected not just for its smaller size, but it's got this white edge to the leaf. I don't know if y'all can see that. Unlike a lot of variegated plants, it doesn't scream variegation out at you. It's not one of those plants that can be kind of tacky if you use it like I use it at my house. This one's really understated. It just gives that real kind of silvery look to it, which is great in the garden. These grasses always look good with some of the asters, rudbeckia type plants. But grasses in general are good for providing a textural contrast with other more broadleaf things. Miscanthus is a plant that had some issues with invasiveness in some areas. If you drive out towards the mountains, you can see them growing along the sides of the roads quite a bit. So you should be careful about where you use them. I would never recommend using Miscanthus out in kind of naturalistic settings anymore, which is how they used to be used, which is some of the problem. But in a garden, they're really the seeds aren't going to be dispersed that far. Very tough, drought tolerant, really tolerant of soil, sandy soils, clay soils. Really easy plants to use.
Is that the same plant in shade?
That is the same plant in shade. Let's see, back in the back. Really, they want some sun or light shade, but they definitely want to have some sun for at least part of the day.
I haven't noticed that seeding around as opposed to other Miscanthus.
Yeah.
Is that your experience?
There's definitely a difference in how much seed, how many flowers and seed are produced between different cultivars of Miscanthus sinensis. They're not all the same. I'm just not well enough versed to really say that. This has not been one that has flowered heavily for us here. It's not been one that I've noticed a lot of seed heads on, but and other places I've grown I haven't noticed a lot. But I've never read that, and I don't know that I don't know that well enough to speak confidently on that. Anybody else notice that on these plants? Not flowering much.
Like tolerate a hard fruit?
Oh yeah, the Miscanthus sinensis is very, very hardy. Yeah, it's no problem. Now I should mention this here. Most of the ornamental grasses I'll talk about, are not evergreen. They'll turn brown once it gets you go into fall. Some have fall color. This does not really. Kind of turns a nice golden tan color. Lots of people leave them up for winter interest, and generally it's best to leave grasses up for at least the first half of the winter. Kind of protects the crown, keeps them from rotting out, getting too wet. That's more of your issue is winter wet than cold with a lot of these. But then before the new growth starts coming up in the spring, you want to cut them back. Some people burn them, but generally cutting them back is good. What I like to do, and I've told people this a lot, they always think I'm crazy, is I'll take grass, especially when they start getting to be a pretty good size, and I'll tie it all up, kind of like they do your Christmas tree, just wrap it up so it's nice, tight thing, and cut it with a chainsaw down at the base. Instead of trying to snip it little bits at a time with clippers. You take it all off in one bundle. It's already bundled up for you. You put it out on the curb and they'll take it away, or you compost it or whatever. Works really well that way. But you do want to do that before it starts emerging. If you do it late, then you've cut all these tips off that grew up and they'll all have brown tips and it just doesn't look terribly good. Grasses, especially these clumping grasses, and most of the grasses we're going to talk about are clumping grasses, do need to be divided every so often. They'll start to die out in the center. If you notice that, or you think it's getting to that point, just dig up the grass. Just go all the way around, dig it. It's a very fibrous root system. They're very forgiving, and whack it apart into divisions, and replant what the divisions from the outside. Throw away the stuff from the middle of the clump, especially if it's starting to die out. And then you'll have extra plants, so you give them to your friends and guilt them into giving you plants that you really like from their yard.
What's the best time of year to do that?
Best time of year to do that is you can do it fall or spring. I like doing it in the fall. What I find is when I do that in the spring, and a lot of times you'll have kind of these wedge-shaped divisions. They kind of retain that shape all summer long. That first season, they just look funky. If you do it in the fall, they look a little finished, more finished when they come up in the spring. And they will root. If you do them in the fall as they're going dormant, they'll root. Over the winter, through the fall, that you have nice established plants. Any other questions?
Mark, could you say something briefly about warm weather and cold weather grasses and how you treat them differently? Not that you know.
Okay. Well, there are two types of grasses: warm weather and cold weather grasses, and technically those are separated out by their mode of photosynthesis. I'm not going to go into C3, C4 plants and Krebs cycles and things like that here, but in general, the warm season grasses are active and growing during warm times, during summer months, and cool season grasses generally want to go more dormant during the summer and require more water during the summer to keep them active. That's generally what keeps it going. The ship's getting ready to leave. And most people are familiar with those from their turf grasses. Most ornamental grasses, the majority of them are warm season. But turf grasses, if you have fescue, that's a cool season grass. Looks great in the fall and the winter, and in spring. Really, fall and spring is when it's ideal, and over the winter it'll stay green, and then it wants to go brown over the summer unless you put a lot of water on it. And then there's warm season grasses like Bermuda grass and centipede and zoysia, some of those, and those stay much greener during the summer, and then they go brown during the winter, and it has to do with their photosynthesis cycle mainly, but really for the most part, if you plant warm season ornamental grasses, they are mostly pretty drought tolerant. If you drink some of the cool season ones, really are better with a little bit of supplemental summer water, like you would with most of your garden. Does that answer your question?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, this next one is sometimes called purple millet, Pennisetum, purpureum. This is one called vertigo. As far as I can tell, it doesn't have a correct common name on it for it, but it is a purple leaf Pennisetum. And there have been several of those that have come out over the last 5 or 6 years. Prince and Princess were ones. They're still in our perennial border. We can look at those as we go by. This is the one that's top of our list right now. Now this is a subtropical plant. It can be terribly invasive in warmer areas. For us, it is marginally hardy. We haven't had this out over a winter yet, but we planted it out from a small container this season, and you can see what it's done in one season, which is why you can see why they like these plants, this type of plant, for biofuels. The plants that we have Prince and Princess, which are similar, same parentage, same general look, just doesn't stay as deep burgundy as this one. Those have survived for us for coming on 4 years, I think, 4 or 5 years, but they don't flower and set seed for us. So there's not an invasive issue there. And that's the last 4 or 5 years, we've had some pretty mild winters. So if they were going to do that, we would have started seeing that. Now, another 100 years, if it gets even warmer, maybe these will be a problem here. But right now, your bigger issue is good chance they won't survive the winter, that they'll die back. So something like this that's marginal, you don't want to cut back in winter. You really want to wait until it starts warming up and it's really thinking about growing again, and just cut it a little bit higher than you would otherwise to allow it to come up through. But great broad strappy burgundy foliage, holds this color all summer long, even in blazing heat, which is unusual for a lot of these purple leaf plants. It can get you. A lot of these grasses can if you mess with them wrong, they can get little paper cuts from them. And this is one that will do that. If it does flower, you'll get kind of bottle brushy type flowers. That'll be kind of pinky burgundy, kind of nice. And if anybody's familiar with millet, that's what the seed heads will look like on it. But we, like I said, we don't generally get the seed heads here. But full sun, well-drained soil.
I've had millet before and deer eat it.
Had millet before and deer eat it. Yes. People eat it. Why wouldn't deer eat it? Yeah, I don't know. I can't answer that. We have no deer here.
Right. And
So.
they typically don't bother.
Wanting to rid your pampas grass, called stuff like
Yeah, some of the other grasses don't. And I don't know if they will with this. This is not a true millet. Millet is millium. So I don't know that they will or will not, but I can't answer either way for sure on that. Anybody have experience with Pennisetum, purpureum, and deer?
Mm-mm.
Nope. I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Next one on the list is this Pampas grass. Now before I was here, I was out on the coast, and this started getting a bad name out on the coast because it does seed around a bit out there. Not generally a problem here in the Piedmont. This is a form called Sunningdale Silver Pampas grass. Pampas grass is a large grass, grows on the Pampas in Argentina, Pampas, I don't know how to pronounce that. Down in Argentina, Bolivia, those grasslands, which I can only imagine going through those grasslands and having these 12-foot grasses above you. But it's a big grass, 10, 12, 15 feet tall, definitely a statement in the landscape. Really nice arching foliage, generally at about 6 feet tall, maybe a little bit taller. On Sunningdale Silver, it has a real nice silvery cast, often has a little bit of a white midrib to it. And then you get these extremely stout flower stalks that come up above it. Sunningdale Silver was named for its, because it produces more flower stalks per plant than most other Pampas grasses do. And they have that really silvery white look to them. Very beautiful. If you do like dry flower arrangements, they're great for that. But just a kind of a neat plant for that big, bold statement in the landscape. Questions about that?
Fertile?
Pardon?
Are those fertile?
Are these fertile? Well, they haven't gone to seed yet, but they are fertile flowers, yes.
I've been told the reddish ones are fertile and the white ones are not, and I've never really checked it out. I just wondered if you...
Well, I know from the coast, ones that had those. Now, there are other other plants that have been called Pampas grass that have more red, that tend to be more fertile. But no, these are fertile and will seed around in some areas. But here it really don't seem to be a problem. In fact, with young plants of this, put them in the ground. If you have a really cold winter, often you'll lose them that first winter. They are a little on the tender side. But one of the nice things about Pampas grass is it does start flowering early in the season, early enough in the summer that you really get to appreciate the flowers. Some of the other ones kind of go pretty late. Some of these kind of ones that are marginal in terms of hardiness, or just hardy. Nice. I talked about some non-natives. This is one of our great native grasses, Panicum virgatum, and Panicum virgatum ranges over a wide area. So it's got a lot of genetic diversity in it over this whole range of most of North America down into Central America and Cuba, all kinds of places. This is a new one called Cheyenne Sky. It's only been out for a few years now. Panicum virgatum switchgrass, which was named because as the wind blows it kind of switches around, or at least so I've been told. That may be one of those things where the explanation came after the plant. But Panicum virgatum tends to be relatively upright. There are some that are a little more arching, a little more open, some that are very upright. But typically a very upright plant, much more of a vertical accent than the Miscanthus, which is arching over. Cheyenne Sky is one that is a little bit smaller. Terrible soils here. If we had a little more water, a little more fertility, it'd be a little taller than this. but generally in the 3 to 4 foot range size. But it also has, to date, it's the best, probably the best of the red foliaged Panicums. And it comes out kind of blue-green. You can see some of that foliage here around the base, a really nice blue-green. But quickly, the upper foliage will turn burgundy red, and really it starts to go into that burgundy red fall color pretty early in the summer, and keep on going until fall. So you can see this has got, I mean, that's a lot of color in one grass. You blue-green, kind of that silvery blue-green, the burgundy, a little buff in there, kind of a nice plant. And it is a native, so if you're concerned about the grasses seeding around, it's a good one to do. There are some really big ones. There's one called, I think, Thundercloud that I've just recently seen that's probably close to 8 feet tall and straight up and really dense. It's like a holly hedge, and you see it growing as a hedge. So really neat plant. Questions about Panicums? All right, that's a good one. Look for that one, Cheyenne Sky.
Is it available in the trade?
It is. We are lucky. We have one of the best wholesale grass producers in the country here in North Carolina, just up in Bahama. So they produce a lot of these. That's where this one came from. So they're selling them to all the garden centers around here. Of course, they're selling them to garden centers in Canada and all over. I mean, just all over the place. So we have relatively good access to grasses in this area. So your garden center should be able to get that easily. One of the most commented on grasses at all the gardens I've worked at are Muhlenbergias, the Muhly grasses. And those are New World grasses. They're native North American ones. They're native to this area. Sweetgrass, you may know it as. And there's some that are more western. But this one is a hybrid that was discovered as a seedling in Texas at Yucadu Gardens. It's a hybrid between two of the really more popular landscape ones, Muhlenbergia lindheimeri and Muhlenbergia capillaris. And it kind of combines some of the best of both of those plants. And it's got hybrid vigor. Plants that are hybrids are often do much better as opposed to animals that are hybrids. Usually are not so good. But it makes this kind of big, rounded clump of spiky blue-green foliage. The leaves are kind of curled up on themselves, so it looks almost like a juncus or rush with these kind of round leaves on here, round foliage. So you got this really nice texture out here. I don't know that we're using it to its best advantage here because we don't have a really good contrast where you can see that color and that form as well as we could. When you have other kind of spiky bluish things, it gets lost a little bit. But in a perennial border with more herbaceous material, really shows up to better effect. It's when it flowers, and it's just starting to. There's a few flowers starting to come out here, but you can't really get a good appreciation. You're gonna have to come back out here in a couple of weeks and look at this. It gets loads of these real airy pink panicles of flowers on here, like our native sweetgrass, which is so incredible. The Muhlenbergia lindheimeri is more of a buff color. It doesn't have that great pink. So it's really nice that this did retain that. When it's in flower, it's one of the most asked about plants in the garden always, because it's just this haze of pink above the plant. You can't take a picture of it. It just does not work. I have tried, but really it's quite striking. It likes a sunny spot, well-drained soil. Kind of the lindheimeri parent in it makes it a little more intolerant of damp soils than the capillaris parent of it. So it does like fairly well-drained soil. Doesn't need to be in a xeric garden like this, but a sunny perennial border with pretty good drainage is perfect for it.
So what does lindheimeri contribute to the plant, would you say?
Well, size, heat and drought tolerance, and this, I think the more silvery foliage.
It also seems to be less floppy.
Yeah, it's much more rigid plant than Muhlenbergia capillaris, which is really, it's really just kind of a soft. And you can look at that plant up by where we met. There's some plants right up by the visitor center there. This is our first bamboo. We're going to talk about a couple of bamboos. This is one called Fargesia rufa. This is a relatively newly discovered bamboo. It's not new, just new to us, new to Westerners, I guess. The Fargesias are really nice clumping bamboos. Tend to be kind of that medium-sized bamboo. There's some really low spreading types and then big, tall timber bamboos. The Fargesias are somewhere in the middle, usually in the garden, 8 to 15 feet, although they can go to 20 feet if they're really happy. This is a fairly newly planted one. Bamboos, one of the differences with bamboos of most other plants is most bamboos, not all of them, but most of them have woody stems. They have they form lignin in the stems, but they are grasses. And over time, as this gets larger, the culms will get larger and larger and get to be an inch, inch and a half. The culm is just the stem on a grass. Fargesia rufa does not spread. It is a clumping bamboo, so it's stays very much in control. As it gets larger and the stalks get larger, it'll form more of almost a tree. You can keep it as a hedge, but you can kind of let it go up and become almost more like a tree form, and that bare at the bottom and then lots of leaves at the top. Fargesia is one of the favored bamboos for koalas to eat. I'm sorry, pandas. Some bear. Some bear that's not a bear. Pandas to eat. Pandas instantly do not eat all kinds of bamboos. They only eat a very few types of bamboos, but Fargesia is one of them. As they get older, and you can't really see it yet on this one, but the sheaths, which are kind of where these individual leaves attach to the main culm, as they get larger and the culms get larger and the sheaths get larger, everything gets larger. They'll be, especially when they first come out, kind of a coppery, almost red to it where they attach. And so in the spring, on a very vigorous, large plant, you really get this nice spring green and that kind of coppery color on there. Contrary to what a lot of people think about bamboos being tropical, and a lot of them are, many bamboos do grow in very cold areas. They grow on mountaintops in Asia. And this is one that does grow on mountainsides and is pretty cold hardy. It will retain its leaves down to about 8 or so degrees. That seems to be kind of the cutoff, 8 degrees Fahrenheit. It'll retain its leaves. You might get some damage to them. And then at about 0 degrees, the stems will die back to the ground. I don't know what will actually kill the root systems. Most of the ones that have been grown in kind of the mid-Atlantic region have not been killed back from cold, at least not established plants. If you plant this in the fall, all bets are off. But if you give it a good full year to get established, they're very, very cold tolerant. Questions, thoughts?
It seems awfully thick right now. As it gets bigger, would you just call out some of those stems?
Yeah, with all kind of clumping bamboos, as they age, you get some of the larger stalks in there, and they're going up. The older stuff, since it is evergreen, will still be there, but over time it starts to look a little ragged. You start to get some browning on the edges of the leaves. And you just cut those out to clean it up, so it stays nice and fresh and clean. You don't want to cut everything old out and leave only fresh new growth, because it'll be really thin and sparse. But you can clean out, kind of the, stuff from 2-3 years ago is helpful with them.
Does that require shade, or will it grow in sun?
Good question. Does it require shade, or will it grow in sun? It will grow in sun. It will grow in shade. It actually looks best in with a little bit of protection from afternoon sun. This is one that some of the early reports about it were that it was not suited for the southeast. Didn't like the heat and humidity. But it seems to do okay in the heat and humidity if it's given some shade. It's definitely an understory plant where it grows wild. It's the kind of the layer of our dogwoods and redbuds in the forest is kind of what this takes.
How long does it take to achieve the height?
Well, unlike other plants that continue to grow, what this puts out, this stalk that got this tall, that's as tall as it's going to get. When it emerges from the ground, that whole stalk is preformed basically in there. So, next year, the culms, the stems are going to be a little bit thicker on this when they emerge, and they'll grow taller. Now, it was an awfully hot, dry summer, and so it may not have been able to form those great big culms. So, in other words, the richer the soil, the better the water situation over the summer, the more, when it starts forming those shoots for next year, the bigger they can be and the more potential for size. They're like a lot of plants that form buds the previous year. If conditions are great this year, it'll have the potential to form some nice, large, tall stalks. So it could be next year that we get some height on those stalks next year. And then when those stalks are emerging, the better the conditions are, the more they'll stretch. The more water there is, the more they'll stretch and become even taller. If they start emerging and it's very dry, they'll tend to stay smaller. Those cells won't elongate as much, and they'll tend to be shorter. So it's kind of a combination of the previous year and the current year, how tall they actually get. But it will, within a year or two of going in the ground, it will start putting out taller shoots.
Are the roots on that extensive?
No, not terribly extensive. It's a very fibrous root system, just right around here. It doesn't go real far, no. And it doesn't send out rhizomes, underground stems, that will pop up far away.
I think that's good in the container.
Is it good in a container? I think it's probably one of the better ones for a container. It's going to be much more cold sensitive in a container above ground during the winters, and it definitely wouldn't want to be out in full sun in a container. It's definitely going to have heat stress in a container.
My problem with my container plant.
So how do you propagate it?
Divisions.
I tried one of the Fargesias in a plastic pot and wasn't very happy, so I've tried one in a clay pot and seems to be doing a much better job.
Okay?
Yeah.
You have it in some shade?
A little, yeah.
How about winter? Yeah,
I tuck them in for the winter time.
Is it just going to die when it flowers, or don't they all do that?
Yeah, bamboos die when they flower. Most of them, not all of them, and I'm not certain about Fargesia, but they don't flower very often. So generally not too much of a problem, but probably will die when it flowers. They tend to, when they flower, the whole thing flowers and goes over. But there are bamboos that have been in the country for 100 years that haven't flowered yet. So. There's always the fear that one day they're all going to flower. They're all going to die, but there's going to be a million seedlings everywhere too. One of my absolute favorite grasses, and that's probably because I like to garden in the shade because it's hot in the sun, is this Heconocloa, which is called Japanese forest grass or Hakone grass. Not to be confused with Japanese stilt grass, which is the terrible weedy grass Microstesium. You can get this Heconocloa in a lot of different forms. You can get just the plain green if you really search around, although that's kind of hard to find. You can get the one that's been most popular is one called Areola, which has kind of chartreuse and green striped leaves, which is a very beautiful plant. This is one called All Gold, which if you live in the Pacific Northwest and you plant this out in a fair amount of sun, it's incredibly gold. If you live here and you plant it out in full sun, it looks really brown and dead. But if you put it in some shade here, it's kind of chartreuse. Maybe it should be all chartreuse here. But it's this really soft weeping grass. It doesn't stand upright ever. It weeps over. If you see it in containers or big mass planting, it's just the most graceful, soft little low plant. Great for softening edges of things. It will spread over time to form, it can form nice sizable clumps. It is admittedly not the easiest plant for us. It does not like our high heat a whole lot. It likes it cooler, likes growing on, it grows naturally kind of on mountains in Japan where it just doesn't have the high summer temperatures. But it will do reasonably well here if you put it in shade and keep some moisture on it. It's unusual for grasses in that it really is almost entirely deciduous. Not just dies back to the ground, but actually drops its leaves, whereas other grasses hold their leaves until you get in there and cut them back. This one's good for lazy gardeners like me because it does drop most of its leaves. You don't have to mess with it, it'll come back out and be beautiful. There's some red some ones with some red in there. There's another little one over there. I think that's maybe Nicholas. You know, generally people say, oh, you only grow it for the foliage, not the flowers, but actually the flowers can be kind of nice on it. Add another little bit of texture to it. Questions about it? How cold can it get? It is 100% hardy here. I've grown it up into, well into zone 6. I don't know about colder than that. Other questions or thoughts?
You mentioned the Arola or something was another color. Was that
Aureola.
reddish? Aureola?
Mm-hmm.
Red?
No, that one's kind of like this one down here, kind of got some chartreuse and green in the leaves. Overall, it gives a chartreuse look, but it's kind of chartreuse and green striped as opposed to this one, which is just chartreuse in the growth. I can't remember the name of the one that's got some red in there. That has not so far been terribly good for us, but we'll see. We haven't given up on it yet. Okay. Philostachys nigra is like the other bamboo. Its size kind of depends on the spot it's in. Really likes lots of fertility and you know, a fair amount of water to get the best growth. And if you do that, you can get culms that are 2 inches around and 20 feet easily, 35, 40 feet, close to 40 feet if it's really happy. It is another evergreen bamboo. It's completely hardy here. No problems at all with it. People often complain when they purchase it because they say it's not black, it's green. You can see some green culms in here. It takes from 1 to 3 years for those green culms to turn black. They don't emerge black, they emerge green. I spent 2 years at a garden taking care of this and cutting out all those darn reversions. Good thing it's evergreen. This is planted in a concrete container. It has recently escaped that container, so deal with it. Pardon?
Well, it didn't start out in a container. I mean, wasn't this more spreading through this place before?
No, this one's been here. This one's been here. Now we have some other ones that are not contained. This one has been contained. And if you want to contain a bamboo, you really want to go down 30 inches or so deep with your whatever your barrier is, and you want a barrier that does not have gaps. Like
42 is better.
42 is better.
Poured concrete.
60 probably is. So concrete is pretty good.
On the inside too.
If you do metal, if you want to really have a long overlap, because those shoots will come out of there. If you want to grow a spreading bamboo as a specimen in a lawn and mow around it, you can do that. But you want to have at least as tall as the plant can get, which with this is about 35 feet tall. You want to have that much space around it to mow, because those underground rhizomes will grow about as tall as the culms on a mature
50
specimen.
feet and pop up.
What's that?
I saw one that was 40 or 50 feet across the guy's backyard and it popped up.
Yeah, but if you have just one or two here and there, they're pretty easy to deal with. It's when you have they're really going. So as a good rule of thumb, as tall as the plant will get, you mow around it that far. But yeah, I mean they could go beyond that too. If you do put a containment system in, you don't want to do what we have over here and over here, which is have mulch over the edge of your containment, because it will go right over that and you won't see it, and the next thing you know it's popping up. There are two forms of growth for these running bamboos, two kind of life cycle issues, and I can't tell you which ones are which because I'm not a bamboo expert. But on one type, they will send their runners out, the rhizomes out, and then they will root in and then send up the shoot. Those are the most difficult kind. Those are the worst kind because you don't see them send up the shoot. Other kinds, and most of them, and Philostachys does actually fall into this, you just have to be diligent about it. They send their rhizomes out, then they go up, and as they start going up, they start rooting down. So if you go through and kill off the tops or cut through the tops when it's first emerging, you've killed it. It won't continue to spread there. You have stopped that rhizome. Now it'll be going out other places, while you're doing that. But you have stopped that one rhizome. So there are the two types, and if you talk to a bamboo expert, they can tell you which ones. If you want to just have it planted and trench around it, you can, with type like Phylostachys, if you trench around it every spring, you will cut off all those rhizomes that are going out, and you will prevent it from growing up. You got to make sure you get all the way around it. The other type, you have to trench around it every fall and then again every spring, because you do it in the fall, the ones that have gone out and are going to be sending down roots. So you got to get those in the fall, but also over the winter, after you've done that, they will send out more shoots and kind of do the same thing in spring. So you have to do it again like the ones you do in spring. If you like this plant and you want it, be very careful when you buy it. If you're getting it really cheap, there's probably a reason you're getting it cheap. It's actually, for something that spreads like this, it's difficult to propagate because you do it by division, but those rhizomes go out very far. So you have to get an actively growing rhizome. If I were to divide out a piece of this and it was an old piece without any active rhizomes that were going out and coming up, you would probably have a plant that would sit there and be evergreen, and good chance it would never send out a new shoot, and eventually this old stuff is going to get ratty and ugly, and you're going to want to cut it back, and you're never going to have anything else coming up. So there's a reason why something like this is generally very expensive for a small plant, because you have to get that actively growing rhizome coming up, but you also need actively, already active stalks coming up, and that can be difficult. Questions? All right, we'll move on then. Usually there's lots of questions.
We've all been scared.
The last bamboo on the list, I do like bamboos. They can be a pain, but I do like them. This is another clumping one. This is one that's not going to be a problem for you if you grow it. Bambusa multiplex, which is one of the hardier bamboos. Bambusa, the traditional bamboo, Bambusa multiplex. This is one called tiny fern. And you can see where it gets that name. It's got kind of fern-like foliage. And it typically does this. You get this, when it's younger, you get this really smaller leaf, kind of arching habit. And as it starts to get a little older, it'll go more upright. They can grow usually about 8 feet tall, but they can get up to close to 20 feet over time. But make a really nice plant. You can shear these into little shapes and things like that, hedges, tightly clipped hedges if you want. Bamboos are very adaptable to that. And this one, since it has so many leaves on there, it really works well if you wanted to do that. Or you can just, if it grows up, you don't want it that tall, you just cut those combs in half, and you cut it here and it'll just stay green right there, and that's as big as it'll get. So that's nice. Those combs, when they go up, that's it. They're not growing any taller, so you can keep it clipped to whatever height you'd like. Very drought tolerant once they're established. Very tough plants. It's bamboo. They're easy to grow. This is one that does do pretty well in a container. Much better than some of the other ones. It looks good in a container. If you want a little miniature garden, you can keep it short and make it look like a bigger bamboo. Questions? I've said a lot about bamboos, that'll bring y'all out on it. There is black bamboo that is unconstrained back over here, and all through here, and soon to be over there. For large type, accent type grasses, you have showed you the Pampas grass. This is another one. This is another Miscanthus. And despite the name, people think it's a native one because it's Miscanthus floridulus. Florida means flowering, in case you didn't know. It does. So when you see Florida in a plant name, it usually means that it flowers heavily. So this is actually an Asian Miscanthus. But what's nice about this is it is so rigidly upright. It does not flop. You don't get that flopping that you get with some larger perennial border type plants. It always stays upright as long as it's getting plenty of sun. It wants sun. Very soil adaptable, from sandy soils all the way over to fairly wet soils. It grows well. It can get to 12 feet tall when it's in full flower. It does spread. It's not a clumping Miscanthus like the first one I showed you. It will spread to form sizable clumps. Now it isn't like a bamboo where it's sending up shoots 5 feet away. It's just this clump grows pretty rapidly. There's a lot of photosynthetic material in there, so it puts on a lot of growth pretty quickly. but it's nice. It goes upright, kind of has that corn type look, you know, very straight stalks and then leaves arch over. There's kind of a nice white mid-straight down there, but very good. Probably, again, not necessarily best used here, how we have it here. You want, you know, things growing in front of it to hide its knees down there, but it's nice coming up in the back of a border, kind of towering over everything else, especially since it won't flop on it. It's also rigid enough that kind of the smaller herbaceous vines, some of the smaller clematis and things like that can clamber up through there and flower. Annual morning glories look good doing that, and it's really nice that way. Questions?
It says 4-inch pot for 2,000. Was that? Wow. Oh goodness.
Yes. But that's over a decade. That's a long time. This is the same genus as sugarcane. That's Saccharum arundinaceum. Saccharum, obviously, sugar. So same related to sugarcane. This grows Africa, around the Mediterranean region, over into Asia. Another big tall grass. Much different than Miscanthus florigelus in that it's really the flower stalks that give this so much height. The foliage at about 6 feet usually tops out. It's arching over at about 6 feet tall, so it makes this nice graceful clump during the summer. And then when it's topped by the flower stalks in late summer, really all of a sudden, boom, it gets great height. So again, another one that is perhaps better farther back in the border, because while everything else, all the other perennials are low, this is going up and arching and being nice, and then as they get taller, this is putting up those flower spikes above them. Another one that for full sun really tolerates a very dry soil. It's not like the other sugarcane, the true sugarcane, which likes some moist soil. If you put it in too rich of a soil, you'll tend to get more flopping. That's one of the really nice things about the florigelus, is how rigid it is. This one, you can get it opening up and kind of flopping as it gets to be in too rich a soil, or if it really needs to be divided, it'll start flopping also. Questions?
Excuse me, is that true for all the ornamental grasses? If they're in too rich soil?
For the most part, yeah, they're adapted for drier, more soils that aren't quite as rich, that don't have that, they're not having leaves from forest trees falling on them. Generally, they're in grasslands. They're in prairies or savannas or steppe or pampas, and those soils tend to be a little leaner than in other spots.
Watering them.
Sure. Anything you have that is newly planted needs to be watered for establishment. I don't care how drought tolerant something is, it really needs to be watered to get it to be established. And that can be for 1 year for drought tolerant plants, for herbaceous perennials, a lot of times 1 year is enough to get them established. Woody plants sometimes take a little longer, a couple years, 2 or 3 years. If you have a summer like 2007, where it's a 100-year drought, everything wants watered. Everything does. A summer like this that we had, where it's 100 degrees for most of the summer, things can use some water because the water is being lost so quickly through transpiration. But generally, with something like grasses, after that first year that they're established, they really don't need much more in the way of water for most of these. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, just thinking about the water bill in your knowledge that you got to reduce the conservation.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely do, and that's why you want to, if you can use drip tubing. Drip tubing's great, especially if you can, don't put it in permanently. Move it around, or concentrate your planting. Say, okay, this year I'm going to plant in this one area. And I can put a sprinkler on it once every 2 weeks, once a week. If it's really bad, I can put a sprinkler on it regularly. Next year, it's on its own. If it lives, great. If it dies, well, only the strong survive. And next year, I'm going to plant over here. But if you put in a plant here, and a plant here, and a plant here, and a plant here, it's really hard to water. You got to either hand water, and you got to be careful about that, because most people don't give plants enough water when they hand water, or you got to just kind of let them go on their own. One good thing you can do is plant in the fall. we're starting to get, things are cooling down, so plants aren't using up as much water. We're starting to get some rain in again, and the soil will stay warm long after the nighttime, the air temperatures go down. So the plant will stop growing because the air temperatures get cool. You know, sometimes it isn't until late November here, but the air temperatures will get cool, plants will stop growing, but the soil will stay warm, especially if it's mulched, and the roots will grow out. And so by next spring, you've already got a plant that is somewhat established.
Will, I mean, will it talk to you in terms of what water?
Most plants will. This plant did not get water. This summer it did not get water. Most of this did not get water this summer. Maybe once or twice we put a sprinkler on it for an hour, but for the most part, no. I do not water at my house. 1 year. After that, you live or you die. Here we got a couple that are close together, so if you found a good shady spot, you may want to stay in there. I'll try and talk loud. Okay, the next one is this one back here in the back. Yeah, I mentioned Miscanthus is one of the most planted ornamental grasses. Pennisetum is probably the next most planted ornamental grass. It's called fountain grass, the different fountain grass. This is one, tall tails, Pennisetum orientale tall tails. There are different species of Pennisetums that are sold. This is one that I particularly like. It's a slowly spreading perennial grass, kind of fine, nice textured, not a whole lot. You know, the foliage is good for texture around other things, but nothing really to write home about. But then this starts flowering very early, and it's really selected for how heavy and how long, physically long, the flowers are on it. And it just, they kind of float above it. And if you look, you can see flowers which are just starting to emerge. They're the ones that are kind of upright and still short, and ones that are starting to go over and go to seed. So you can see this has been flowering for a long, long period. It ranges over a very wide range from Western Europe down all the way around the Mediterranean through some of the kind of North Middle East into India and Asia. This form was actually found in Pakistan and was in the trade as Pennisetum species Pakistan for a long time. Easy to care for, just like the other ones. Cut it back in, once a year. Otherwise, let it grow. Divide it every now and then. Questions? All right.
Does it say anything about how it seeds around?
Pennisetums can seed a little bit, but not bad. Not as bad as like Miscanthus can. And really, there aren't too many reports of this being an invasive plant. Miscanthus can be invasive in some areas. Pennisetum, not really. It can seed in the garden a bit. I do like this grass a lot. Nacella tenuissima, or if you're getting it from somebody who doesn't like to change with botanists, Stipa tenuissima. Mexican feather grass, sometimes called Mexican ponytail grass. Real neat little super fine texture plant. This is about as fine texture as you can get. They're almost wiry foliage. They curl around and look like wires. Comes up, it's a kind of a nice mid-green, but it always has kind of this yellowish buff cast to it. It looks like something from Mexico. It looks like something you see growing in a tumbleweed almost. Like plant, but it comes up from a central spot. It's really nice clumper. It will seed around in open soils. If you have lots of plants around it, you won't get seeds. It needs open soils, but it will seed around if you have a lot of open space. But it's not invasive. It's one of those ones that will seed kind of politely around the garden. I really like it. Generally with Nacella, I don't cut it back. I don't do anything to it. I just let it go. It kind of turns nice golden buff color in the fall. Next summer the new foliage comes out. You can see this wasn't cut back and looks pretty good. And it always has this kind of gold and green look to it, which I find is very nice. It's about as big as it gets, as tall as it gets. It'll kind of arch over, and it really is a beautiful plant. You can often get this in plugs if you do kind of large areas in it, and it spreads out. It's just beautiful.
Is this the one at Triangle Town Center on the hills underneath the...
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
They also do the Muhly grass too in the center.
That's not love grass?
No, it's
Other questions? People are fading now. Now they just want me to be done. Yeah, it's love grass.
Oh, well, what is it?
That's right. Eragrastis eliadii wind dancer. Isn't that a great name? This is called love grass. Is its common name, and it's a really one of those plants that are so underused. You just don't see it used very often, especially out this way. And it really should be used more because it's such a nice grass, perfect for gardens. The foliage is relatively low, generally 24 inches or so tall. It's this arching, real nice blue foliage, kind of like a Muhly in a lot of ways. But this really nice blue arching foliage makes a nice form. And then you get these real airy panicles of kind of white above them. This is one that in masses, and there's a little bit more of a mass down at that end. Terribly effective. Even without flowers though, just the foliage is really nice. And you see this used sometimes, there are some designers who will use this kind of under, as a ground cover almost, under kind of open space trees where you have just the grass and then some trees coming up through them. And in the shade they don't flower very heavily, but you have these mounds of really nice arching blue foliage. Particularly lovely. Easy, pretty drought tolerant once it's established. Again, somewhat shade tolerant, but it doesn't flower very well in the shade. So if you're growing it for the flowers, you don't want to put it in the shade. But pretty drought tolerant and I think beautiful, really airy. And with other plants around, it really shows up with the background. That I'm looking at, I don't know from y'all's view, but from here, it's got that fence behind it, some green plants, really effective flowers. Okay, move on to the next one. We've got some here and some here, probably some more down the other end. This is river oats, Miscanthus latifolium, another native grass. The Eragrastis is a native. This is another native grass. Grows a lot along stream sides and river banks and places like that. But it is a very drought tolerant plant. This is one of those grasses that will grow just about anywhere. It'll grow in sun, it'll grow in shade, it'll grow in sand, it'll grow in heavy clay. Different than some of the other grasses in that you've got a real distinct culm and then the leaves come off separate from it as opposed to coming all up from the base or mostly up from the base. The flower and seed heads are very distinctive. Hard to confuse this with anything else. It's a great plant if you do cut flowers and dry flower arrangements. Those seed heads are fantastic. It does seed around the garden, and the seedlings are impossible to pull out. They are the hardest little seedlings to pull out. And if you've ever gardened with this and it's spread in an area where you don't want it to, you may hate it. I know Tim Alderton, our gardener, is not a big fan of this plant.
I had one, because I was in an apartment for years, I had one in a pot for years, I mean maybe 10 years, before I finally got a house and planted it. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a nice plant that is just nice in the patio, in the shade.
It is a nice plant, and it is tough. It'll live in a pot for 10 years and not complain. Really a very easy plant, and it's beautiful after the leaves fall and everything. You have just these little seed heads turn tan and kind of flutter around in the breeze. Really nice, and it'll grow in the shade. I mean, this is pretty dense shade back here, and it's growing just fine back here. And you can see it's a little behind. We've got some more sun that's starting to go buff, and this is still pretty green, the seed heads, but really, really very tough. But good for kind of naturalizing areas, good for cutting gardens. Probably not the best plant for a real formal area of the garden, though. Questions or thoughts?
Isn't there a variegated form?
There is a variegated form. Yeah, river mist maybe,
Yeah.
something like that. The seedlings are not variegated. It's a chimeral variegation, so the seedlings are not variegated on it. But it's beautiful. Tim hates this plant so much he doesn't even want to plant the variegated one. Every time I say something, he goes, "Yeah, but the seedlings are all green." So, I try not to argue too much with him since he's the one who will be having to deal with the seedlings. So. But yeah, really good plant. And really good for a tough spot. It will erosion control. It will spread. It spreads. It seeds around. Like I said, the seedlings really put out great roots. It's fantastic for stabilizing sites, and it's a native plant, so feel not guilty about it. Not that I know of. I take that back. I remember one, I haven't seen it in a long time, where the seed heads very quickly turned kind of a nice rosy pink, kind of burgundy-ish color. But I haven't seen that around for a while, so I don't know if it's still out there or not. Oh yeah. Yeah. Very drought tolerant. Since we have moved our annual trials out here, perhaps the most asked about plant that I have had has been the turf that we put down around it. So I thought I would add it to this list. I'm not a turf guy. Turf is something that, you know, in my mind, something green shows off the rest of the variegated plants better. That's how I look at turf. But other people seem to like it, so I will talk about this. This is Zeon zoysia. And this zoysia, as far as I can tell, is probably a hybrid between Zoysia japonica and Zoysia marlettii or something like that. I don't know the turfs. But it's a pretty new turf. It has been very good for us. Very vigorous growing, more vigorous than we thought. It's encroaching on the beds a little bit more than we thought it would, but it has proven to be very nice. It's selected for its really good color. It's selected for its really dense root system that helps with weed competition. You know, heaven help us if this wasn't good against weed competition, because we'd be in real trouble. It would look like the rest of our turf here. And it was also selected, kind of the standard for zoysia for many years has been emerald. Emerald zoysia has been kind of the top of the line. But if you're familiar with turf grasses at all, if you've ever walked barefoot or sat down on emerald zoysia, it's really prickly and uncomfortable and just kind of a miserable plant to actually touch with your skin. And the Zeon is supposed to be better. Still a little prickly, but it's supposed to be much better than the emerald. So that's one of its selling points anyway. But under minimal care, it looks really good for us out here. Established immediately from the sod that we put down, just established quicker than any other sod I've ever put down before in my life, and has been a really good plant, and people love it. We've actually had the complaint from one of our volunteers, and I don't know who it is, so hopefully it's none of the volunteers out here, from one of our labeling volunteers, that they didn't want to come out here and label because it was too springy and soft, and it was hard to walk on.
It was lay down and take a nap.
What's the best time to lay down the sod?
Okay, the best time to lay down sod, if you're doing and I'm assuming you're probably doing a warm season grass if you're laying down sod.
Do this.
When it's warm.
Yeah.
Don't want to do it in the fall. Don't want to do it in the early spring. You want to do it kind of late spring, where you're still getting some rain to help establish it, because you got to water this stuff to get it established. And but where the soil has gotten up above, probably getting close to 60-65 degrees at minimum for the soil temperature. Staying above that at night and everything.
If you put this kind of zoysia in, and you have the other kind, will one or the other take over, or will they live happily together?
If you're putting this in as sod next to it, you know, they'll probably live fairly happily. My experience with this Zeon is it'll probably start on the edges, start overgrowing it, but it won't kill it out. Well, you know, if you have most warm season grasses, you really have to put down as sod or as plugs. There are some hybrid Bermudas that you can seed, but otherwise it's tough. Most people seem to want fescue lawns, because fescue lawns, you can keep them green year round if you put down lots of water during the summer. You know, the warm season grasses use a fraction of the water, and as water is more and more scarce resource, the idea of putting down tons of water on our lawns is just crazy. So really, people should be moving much more towards these warm season grasses instead of the cool season fescues. Fescue is kind of what everybody thinks of as a lawn. If you grew up north of here, if you grew up south, you're used to the lawns looking brown during the winter. But if you grew up north, you want that fescue, that wide blade. You know, that's what a lawn should be in your mind. And it's hard to get people past that. But we really do need to because they use up so much more water. That, or else they look brown during the summer, and I'd rather have a lawn that looks green during the summer and brown during the winter than the other way around personally. The Xenon is somewhat shade tolerant. That comes from somebody who's selling it, so you can make of that what you will. I have not grown it in the shade.
There's a new Bermuda that's supposed to be more shade tolerant. I don't know how it is, but there's a Zenith Zoysia that looks a little more. It's a little more like fescue.
Yeah.
Look, it's got a wider blade. It's really nice too. And Compadre is another.
I don't know Compadre. Yeah.
I think you can grow that from seed and Zenith too.
And that's what a lot of the work's being done, is doing these as seed grasses,
But don't.
so that because more people will overseed every year, they can make you can make money over a longer time than the big upfront capital of getting loads and loads of sod.
You prep the soil the same way. You got to go down about 6 inches.
Yeah, if you prepping the soil, you're best going about the same way. Maybe not 6 inches with most of these warm season grasses. Probably 4 inches, you're fine.
For those of you that are a member of the Arboretum, the Plantsman's Tours and Friends Lecture videos are available on our website, and there was a wonderful turf one from a couple years ago where the lecturer did spend a lot of the topic, or a lot of the evening, talking about the summer grasses and had a lot of good recommendations and how-tos in it. So that's still available on the website, as all the videos are.
Oh, that's good. 'Cause, yeah, I do not answer most turf questions. I either send them on to somebody else, or if it's an email, I'll look up the answer on the extension, the North Carolina Extension website and turfgrass site, and send in.
Yeah, Turf Files.
Yep.
Turf Files is really good.
Awesome resource.
All right. Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.